Well, welcome back and thank you for staying with us right here morning at NTV. On Next Conversation, we are going to be talking about HIV in the workplace and some of the people who have been the most affected, that's the women. March 1st was International Zero Discrimination Day. Yes, the people who are disabled, the women who are also being discriminated, the men who are also being discriminated when it comes to issues of race or tribe. All those issues, then 8 days later or 7 days later, you had International Women's Day on March 8th, where we were talking about the issues relating to women. So right about now, another issue affecting women is HIV. Yes. So the availability of antiviral therapy, ARV therapy, means that most people who are HIV positive should not become too ill to continue with their work. From an employer's perspective, the most important thing is to ensure that a person with HIV is not discriminated against in the workplace. People living with HIV are legally protected from discrimination in the workplace and during recruitment under the Equality Act 2020. For example, prohibits the use of pre-employment health questionnaires before the offer of a job has been made. Now, discrimination in the workplace can take various forms. And to tell us more about this, we have Dora Chichoncho, the Executive Director of the Uganda Network on Law, Ethics and HIV and AIDS. Many thanks for joining us on Morning at NTV. So tell us the magnitude of HIV and who is being affected the most. I understand it's the women, and I understand you would want to say something about International Women's Day as we move forward. What does it mean to you?
International Women's Day is a day for reflection. It's a day to recognize the far we have come. It's the day to It's what brings us on table this morning, to reflect on ways we've made progress, in ways we've made retrogressive steps, and see what could get done better. So talking about gender equality and women and HIV, we still realize a very big gap. A gender equal world has not yet existed anywhere. If you actually see all states of the world, we have not had a country that is perfectly there, that has made the goal. So that is why it is a progressive struggle to have women enjoy the freedoms and rights. But how does it happen? In HIV, for example, if we could start there, is that we have more women get infected. The ratio is 8.2. HIV infection in women. So
women are more affected than the males?
Yes, women are more affected than the males. We look at the rates of domestic violence. It is 56% occurrence. So it means that more women, a broader number of women, are likely going to suffer violence against women. We look at the rates of education. When 10 children start primary school, and 5 of those are women and 5 are young girls and the 5 are boys, there will be only 1 girl or 2 finishing through the education term. The 3 are definitely going to drop off. There is increasing levels of early marriages. We find young girls getting married as young as 11, 12, 13. That means that the rest of the future of this young girl has been put to the shackles. So when you see different forms of violation, the way life plays out in health access, in education access, in opportunities for work, you realize that women are still struggling to catch up. So that is why it is critical for us to have this conversation and reflect in particular angles, like now this particular morning, to be looking at what does HIV look like in this picture.
So let's take a look at HIV in the workplace. Who's being affected the most? Is it the women?
Generally, HIV is an issue of devaluation. It's an issue of discrimination. So there will be an equal struggle for men and women. But a more complicated scenario plays out for women. And how we have seen it happen in this country is that, for example, you've mentioned the law which outlaws tests to be done before employment happens. But this happens all the time.
It does.
It happens all the time. Just a quick conversation we've been having with the Minister of Gender is you're aware about the export, the labor export that is happening in our country on a daily, how people are finding jobs abroad. And the people who are taking the citizens through this is the Minister of Gender licensed firms. One of the issues where the license has been offered is that you will do a medical test before this person is given a job, and if they are found to be positive, they are not going to get jobs. So of all the people you hear that are traveling to the Middle East, to all these countries, if you're positive, male or female, you don't qualify. You cannot be part of that recruitment. We had hoped that as a country, the Ministry of Gender would put its feet down and say, we will not accept external labor policies that discriminate against our people. But for HIV, it's a given. We asked, why does it happen? They say the other countries determine who they want, what type of labor they want. They want people who are negative, not who are positive. But you as a country, you're accepting it and licensing that our people there has to be an embargo, there has to be a place that they don't pass through. Yet HIV status does not mean that you're unable to work, that you don't have the ability. We have HIV positive people that are making great progress in all industries, globally and in this country. So it is definitely not evidence-based that a policy or a country or employers would want to only want to employ people who are HIV negative. The other way this plays out is in the informal sector, where probably the laws don't reach in our homes, in our households. It is everyday conversation on social media on the acceptance of maids who are positive in our homes. Every other day we see these conversations, and there is everybody calling for chasing, for punishment, for incarceration, for arrests of maids who are found positive. They are tested forcefully, they are not cancelled, they are not given a chance to take charge of their health condition, and it is used against them for them to lose their jobs. This happens informally, and that's why this conversation is good, for us to have it in the public in our public domain and ask, is it fair? Will you be enabling an opportunity for a young person to be able to work, a woman, a young girl? Because being positive does not equate to being malicious, to being evil, but because you have a virus, it's going to be definitely used against you, and sometimes in very obscene ways.
And how does gender exacerbate that problem? You're already being discriminated because you have HIV. So now the issue of being a woman, how does that make it more worse?
So the people who are going to be looking for these informal jobs are the women. The people who want to be tea girls in offices, casual laborers, are the women. The bigger number are the women, but also the men are not treated any more different, only that the chances for women to be seeking for such employment, to be needing such employment, like basic things to live by, are the women. Who are going to work to be able to fend for their children are women, and if they are HIV positive, they are going to suffer more chances. You know, they are going to suffer more violence. The door is going to be locked out on them because of their HIV positive status. These are the issues we hope to bring to the fore and ask that the public out there becomes more enabling, becomes more supportive, because what our households are doing, what the ministries are condoning by passing these licenses, is out of ignorance. It is not evidence-based. It is out of science. It is out of fear. So when people are fearful, they will embargo everybody. So there will not be time for reflection. There will not be time for options. There will be more use of torture and suffering on this person. And we have had so many cases reported. Just last year in 2 years back, 2018, our organization, Uganet, we followed up a media story of the Chinese companies that were working on the Entebbe Express Highway. They were using a lot of casual laborers, cooks, cleaners. Lots of them were women, but also men who were drivers. And every other month, they were taken to a particular hospital, clinic on Entebbe Road, forcefully tested. And of those who were tested, they were, if they found you to be positive, you would be chased away from the
workplace,
from that express highway
site.
construction site. Several people got affected. We were able to talk to 11 individuals through this investigation that we did. About 5 were able to come up and say, take our case to court. So we are currently in court seeking for reparations against the CCCC company, because we have individuals that were fully employed and suffered these violations. So we find that the violations don't happen in black and white. We know that the law has outlawed them, very good. But though we've made progress in law, we've not made equal progress in practice.
We are going to talk about a law in a little bit and the resources allocated for the same. But one of the most prevalent forms of discrimination in Uganda is violence against women.
Sure.
What are its drivers and what steps can be taken to address that problem and empower women?
Violence against women. Violence against women is a power issue. It's who is more powerful to fight back, who has authority, who has power. So depending on who is more powerful, they will be violated. And socially, we have accepted. There's a social acceptance that women are the weaker sex.
I thought that was changing. Now that you have an educated population, are we still grappling with that stereotype?
Unfortunately, yes, because these deeply seated norms take time to change, and until we are intentional on changing them, until we are intentional on continuously having these conversations, until we do some things differently, until our general community accepts that they have power, but they shouldn't use the power negatively.
Let's continue with the drivers of this violence.
That is what I'm heading to. It's about power. And that is where the answer is. That's where the problem is, and that's where the answer is. Power to create change. Yes, because the women who are made powerless will continue to thrive in all these forms of violence. But if the men realize that they have something to do about it, if the women also realize that they have power, so we have a power balance. Like women and men all live happy relationships. They all contribute to fending for their families. You all have a contribution to make. That way, our attitudes, our deep-seated norms start to change. And that is when we start to reduce violence against women. That is when it starts to change. But right now, we are still grappling with very high incidence rates. Well, there is some bit of progress. What it was 10 years ago is not what it is today. There's been some changes, but we need to make it better, because we still see women suffer in intimate relationships. We still see structural violence against women because the odds are against them.
Now, before we get to the solutions to empower women, let's talk about the issue of culture and how it has exacerbated the problem against violence towards women. Conservative cultural values, how have they exacerbated the problem of violence against women?
That's the deep root. That is the deep root. Yes, that is the root cause that I'm talking about. Culture, the way people think, the way people are socialized, the way people are normalized, our different cultures. For example, let's say in our country, what our different cultural groupings tell us is okay. Women are not, they don't have a voice that men have. Women don't have the opportunities that men have. Women's place is in the kitchen.
I did talk to the ambassador of Toro, and I asked him, can a woman be enthroned as the leader of Toro Kingdom? And he said,
what did he say?
He said, never. According to culture, we can never let a woman take over the reins of the kingdom. And it hit me so hard. Please continue.
That's the actual lived reality. And that's like at the highest helm. But what about the basic issues of being on decision-making bodies,
Indeed.
being able to take a stand, being able to take a decision? Look at religion. Religion is one area in which we are not equal at all. There is a place for men, there is an idolized place for men, a very lifted place for men that is not for women. So you realize that when these struggles are still there, in some ways they are going to play out very negatively, they are going to disempower very profusely, and that is why usually when you report, even on social media every day, you see these whole videos of women being beaten, and it's okay, nobody's putting up alarm. Of course we know that there is all this conversation of voice that, what about men? We saw videos where also men are being beaten, but the gap in between favors the men more than the women. The science, the data, the information shows that we have more women struggling. The incidence rate that we are still grappling with as a country is 56%. That means that over half of this country's women and girls will face violence in the relationship they are going to get in, which is a very bizarre situation.
Very bizarre.
Yes, very bizarre. So you can imagine if your wife, your daughter, your sister is going to likely have a very bad life, be humiliated, be violated. All violence takes all forms. It may not be necessarily physical, but it is emotional. It is sexual violence. We see that the highest, one of the increasing crimes, according to the Uganda police report, is rape and defilement. Always going high year by year. So it means that the females are increasingly being violated.
And some people do not know that even texting a woman with some sexual text, that's also considered sexual harassment.
Yes,
and
yes, that is sexual harassment.
It's happening too much.
It's happening too much. It's accepted in our workplaces.
So let's talk about those solutions.
So that sociability of people not saying this shouldn't happen, you taking a stand and say this shouldn't happen is a conversation we need to have, is where our communities need to go to and say this is social. Violence is not normal. We don't accept it. And that is what these campaigns, right from 1st March, 8th March, are meant to do, to help us realize that we need not to socialize violence, we need not to make it normal, we need not to accept it. And until we do that, we know that we will be having a gap. Many more women will not be accessing education if we don't remove the barriers that stop them from finishing the school they start. You see, many more women will not be able to access health services. They will be living under fear. They will not be able to seek employment. They will not be able to have the same economic opportunities. Imagine if you're a maid and you're thrown out of a home, but your counterpart stays at a job. That gap is so big that it needs to be closed some way.
Mr. Choncho, is that why we saw this year's International Zero Discrimination theme focus on the women and girls on March 1st?
Yes, sure. It was a global drive to put a little bit of light and torch on the vulnerability that women and girls still access. Like it was highlighted just yesterday on International Women's Day, that there is no country in the world that has hit that mark.
And
we are all still struggling. So you can imagine what it means, let's say, for our African context, where cultures are still deep, religious beliefs are still deep, opportunities to have these conversations are still shrinked, and the struggles to really come out of the things that tie us down. If you can't have the same chances in education, if you can't have the same chances in seeking employment, if you can't have the same chances in you need health the most, but you can't access the health services, or if you access the health services, there will not be enough for you to enjoy your rights.
Indeed.
I want to end with the constitution of our country. The Ugandan constitution, and this is the point of reflection that was a big deal for us just yesterday.
Can you
'cause
give
the
us a few
country
solutions to this problem before we go into the Constitution? We mentioned so many problems affecting women. We haven't talked about any possible solutions that can be employed in the interim to
the
empower
places that we started out to see that they are the gatekeepers of attitude, of knowledge, of beliefs, the religion, the culture, the households, the workplace. If these places where the power pedestals lie continue to have them skewed, not in favor of women, but more in favor of men, the gap remains. But if these gatekeepers of power, the pedestals of power, continue to raise the bar for women, raise opportunities for women, then it means that we will start to create a gender equal world. We will start to reduce the discrimination that happens for those who are seeking employment, and then they will be able to access. So that is one way in which we can have it
Amazing.
done. Why I was going to the Constitution, it's the grand norm, it's the grand law. All these laws get their power out of the Constitution. It is very clear, very emphatic on rights of a woman and how women need to be protected. It is very clear on zero discrimination, depending on whatever status, whether health status or gender status. So if we could give life to our Constitution, if we could implement the laws, if our government could implement these policies in line with the spirit of the Constitution, there would be a lot of change. And because it was an issue of reflection, the national theme was, how far has Uganda come? How far has our Constitution been implemented?
Can we talk about that Constitution for a while? Because I would like to know, in your opinion, do you think government has allocated enough resources for the implementation of laws that are meant to protect women, such as the Domestic Violence Act, the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act, and Trafficking of Persons Act?
Not quite.
Go
not
ahead.
quite.
Explain.
Not quite.
Explain.
And that is where I was coming, that if government was implementing its mandate under the law, then we would be solving some of these problems. We would be opening windows of opportunity to lessen the trauma, to lessen the violation, to give women a voice and a platform. The Domestic Violence Act is one of the best legislations Uganda has on table. It recognizes that these imbalances, these violations happen at a local community level. It puts solution at a local grassroots level. It gives power to LC courts to be able to have conversations in a home setting and address violence against women. It actually allows LC1 courts to hold sessions on a weekend. Even after 4 p.m., you can have a court session if you hear that in a particular family, so-and-so is being battered unfairly. The LC1 court is given all that mandate, but they don't know.
Implementation.
It is 10 years since the law got passed. It has made its 10th birthday, but we have made very little gains out of that law. We have had very little budget appropriated to this law. It's NGOs, people in the development sector, that have made effort to invest in the implementation of such laws, and it hasn't happened. Yet it would be a huge and immense opportunity to ensure that access to justice is availed for the victims of violence against women. Because this is where we have biggest issues. This is where we have biggest gaps, that people continue to suffer in silence. Violence is kind of a silent epidemic, goes in out there open quietly, and people won't seek services. So if the government could invest a little more in the implementation of these laws, we could see that as people see the significance of the law, that improves their understanding. When you have power, when you have knowledge, your attitudes change, your actions start to change, and we start to combat violence against women. So we really need to ask government to come in very quickly and rally its position in ending and protecting and ensuring safety for all women and girls out there.
What are the major areas where women and girls are stigmatized and discriminated against today? Let's interrogate the laws and policies.
Where they suffer discrimination. I want to start with where I have deepest passion for.
Please go ahead.
The HIV legislation. The HIV legislation is a good law, but within that law are very bad provisions that increase chances for these powerless women I've described for you to continue to suffer the power and the wrath of the law. We find that it is women who are going to have HIV more. We find that it is women who are going to know their HIV status before men. So we find that the law that is asking them to come and get tested and know their HIV status is putting penalties for attempted transmission and actual transmission of HIV. So we find that the law puts women at harm. Women are being incarcerated. Just 6 months ago, we handled about 5 cases of women who are being punished for HIV transmission. And when you look at each of these cases, it is not the transmission of the malicious description of a person wanted to transmit HIV to another. It is cases where if you listen to the woman, there was no intention. But the women are in Rosira. Those laws punish women. They give them undue responsibility, yet everybody should be responsible. A man and a woman getting into a relationship should be able to know you should take charge of your life. So blaming it on a woman, giving her extra burden to protect you, because they don't have that power to negotiate with you, to first tell you that they are positive. We know cases of women who will disclose and they are beaten. And that is used against them. We know women who have been chased out of their homes because they disclose. So they are fearful to disclose. So when the law gets where they are weakest at and punishes them extra further, you see that the law is not protective. The law is actually increasing suffering for women by increasing criminalization around HIV. The other law that I talked about is violence against women. Still increasing, still unabated. Laws in place, but practices difficult. Leadership, governance, accountability, implementation of resources, still very poor. The Employment Act. The Employment Act, very good law, very progressive, but not equal opportunities for women.
Okay, Ms. Dora Chichoncho, as we wrap up, what actions can be expedited on an individual basis to promote gender equality in the country? 1 minute.
I started with a power conversation and I end it with power. There is power within each one of us. There is power within to make a difference on these conversations. If people could tap the power within themselves, for women to come up and know that they are worthy to be living, they are worthy to have a voice, they are worthy to find their voice. For men counterparts to know that they have power, not to use it negatively, but they have power to offer a supportive hand. Men are 50% stakeholders into this. So if men could use their power positively over women, if men could not use their power over to harm, they would be enabling their women partners, their mothers, their sisters, their children. So the whole solution for me at interpersonal relationships is balancing of power. Each one of us tapping within the power within to make a difference.
Ms. Dora Chichoncho, the Executive Director of Uganda Network on Law, Ethics and HIV and AIDS. Thank you for having made the time to speak to us. Elbow?
Thank you.
She's been amazing. Dora Chichoncho, the Executive Director of Uganda Network on Law, Ethics and HIV and AIDS. In a nutshell, she's saying men have the power but should be using it to help women, not against the women. In a nutshell, that's what she said. Let's take a very short break. I'll be right back to read your birthdays. This is Morning at NTV.
You're watching Morning at NTV.